The recession alarm bells are ringing, and they haven't rang this loud in the last 60 years. We are in for some real economic pain. Doesn't matter if you're in the US, in Canada, or in Australia, halfway around the world. This upcoming recession will have an impact on you, on me, on everyone around you and I. Global economics are dramatically decelerating, and they're especially decelerating in Western economics such as the US and Canada, but they're also decelerating in other parts of the world as well. But a recession can be avoided. It doesn't matter who or what expert is calling for it. It doesn't necessarily mean that a recession must or has to happen. Having said that, the lightning fast rebound from the COVID-19 induced recession, that is definitely over. People are just flat out starting to spend less, and that's happening because inflation hasn't been this high in the last 41 years. The consumer price index climbed all the way to 9.1% as recently as June in the United States, and Canada is not that far behind with inflation somewhere around 8%. The last time inflation was this bad was around the late 1970s and early 1980s. What's really interesting behind these stats is that half the increase we're seeing in inflation can actually be attributed to energy prices. Not to mention, cost of housing is just getting worse. It doesn't matter if you're renting or if you have a mortgage, both are going up for two different reasons, or for this technical same reason, but they're both going up. Either your mortgage is getting expensive because of higher interest rates, or there's just less inventory of rentals available, causing your rent to go up. Now, according to some economists, inflation may be nearing its peak and may be headed for downward slope. But that doesn't mean that common goods and services are suddenly going to get cheaper. That's not how inflation works. And on top of all that, there are still two major risks that could plunge us into a recession or a deeper recession territory should they were to happen. And I want to spend some time talking about both these issues, or both of these risks. So far, consumer spending has actually outpaced inflation, even though we've seen higher prices that's been chipping away at your disposable income in recent months. Now, a quick reminder and some quick background on what disposable income is essentially the leftover income from your paycheck after you pay for all the basics like food, clothing, and shelter. This rare phenomenon of high inflation, but consumer spending higher still, has created this wedge between income and spending. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen excess savings, stimulus, and just pent-up demand for goods and services that's really helped create this buffer room. It's part of that buffer that's really helped slow down this economic downturn. Yet this wedge isn't necessarily going to be there forever and is going to start shrinking in the next few months. And I would argue it has already started to shrink, and this is a very important indicator that you want to pay attention to. And if inflation doesn't settle, that shrinking wedge or shrinking buffer or whatever else you want to call it will take us straight into an economic slump. This is a major risk, and I want you to pay close attention to this as the events over the next few months and how the next few interest rate hikes, how they all unfold. It's a bit of a race against the clock. If inflation does come down, real disposable income goes back into positive territory and consumption stays positive, then you don't have a recession. On the flip side, if inflation does not come down and consumption intersects negative real wage growth, then this could very well lead us into a recession or even possible a depression. All this really means is that we are right now forced to spend more because of high inflation. You have no choice but to spend more on the same goods and services. But when this gets really out of control, you can no longer keep up with that level of spend, then you're forced to cut back on your spend. And this cutback on spending leads to a consumer-led recession because all of our economic engine really revolves around consumer spending on buying goods and services. This is what keeps the economy running. If you and I stop buying goods and services, then that means less revenue for businesses. Less revenue for businesses meaning they have to pay employees less. They goes into layoffs. That means even less money in the economy flowing around. So it's all connected. So who said economics was boring? Now, this specific scenario that I'm talking about, this is the actual milder version of the two major risks I talked about earlier in this video. Now, the second scenario, this paints even a more grim outlook. If inflation doesn't go down, even with the rising rates, and the Feds and central banks around the world have no choice but to ramp up their efforts to fight against inflation. If they have to raise rates even faster or even with bigger rate hikes, then all this could actually lead us into a deeper recession or possibly into depression territory. We're in this really tight spot right now where we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, where inflation hurts, a recession hurts, and a potential depression, that would really hurt. So governments and federal banks and all those involved have really tough choices to make. How much pain do you cause now? Who does this pain really impact? And what does that pain look like over the long and short and immediate terms? So they have to make tough choices. The pain is very real and it's going to impact us all. But it all depends on who, how and how long that impact lasts. That's what really is driving their choices between fighting inflation, trying to hold off recession. If you try to fight too hard with inflation, then you end up in a depression, all going to unfold in the next few months. Now, in this scenario, job loss and the slack in the economy would actually reverse much of that high demand for goods that's actually led us to this high inflation environment in the first place. The immediate shock would be disinflationary. And once the economy recovers and our inflation environment then should go back into a much more sustainable situation than where we are today. Just a quick thank you to all those who've joined the channel's membership. This content is here because of you, so thank you. If you'd like to continue supporting the channel, all the information you need is in the description below. If you're looking for economic indicators on when we could potentially shift into recession territory, one thing you can focus on is hiring. And hiring, especially in big tech. The biggest tech firms right now are bracing for an economic recession and a very uncertain future. This is also causing even more unevenness that's spilling into other sectors. All across Silicon Valley, news of layoffs and hiring freezes has now become just more and more commonplace. Startups are saying that capital is drying up, and when capital is still available, it's actually become a lot more expensive. So employees are being put on notice that the businesses are changing. Let's summarize what's happening around big tech to give you an idea of what's happening. First, the big Elon Musk takeover of Twitter. Right now it's all tangled up in court, and the future outcome of this is very uncertain. And the company made this very apparent when they released their last quarterly results. Amazon is facing a growing labor movement, and Facebook is facing a new advertising climate where they're trying very hard not to lose advertising ground or advertising market share to Google and TikTok. Snap Inc., makers of Snapchat, their stock dropped 40% the day after that they reported revenue earnings was weaker than expected. And now they've pretty much given up on providing any sort of future guidance on profit, citing uncertainties around our economic environment. In other words, they have no idea what the current economic environment looks like and how it's going to impact them, because the truth is, nobody knows. It's anybody's guess on what the next few months will look like. All you can do right now, or all companies can do right now, is brace for impact. And let's not forget about Netflix. They are continuing to lose subscribers, because one of the first things that people cut when they're trying to make ends meet is their subscription services. And especially if you have multiple overlapping subscription services, you're going to cut, if not all of them, at least a few of them. Let me ask you this. If you had to make a budget cut in your personal finances, what's the first thing that you would let go of? I want to hear from you, so let me know in the comment section down below. Apple is another big name that people pay super close attention to as a potential leading economic indicator. Apple is also preparing to slow down their hiring. They're preparing for hiring freezes. This acts as an economic gauge, because if Apple is making cuts on their spending, their hiring, that means their customers are all expected to cut back on their spending. The market looks at that, and the logic basically is, oh crap, if Apple is cutting back on spending, what about other companies that aren't as strong? And what does Apple see coming down the road that everyone else isn't? For the last decade, tech companies have soared, hired tens of thousands of workers across multiple sectors, multiple industries all around the world. And at the same time, they've amassed a war chest full of cash through ever-growing profits. And as these companies have grown, they've made so much profit, so much money, so did their investors and shareholders. These are some of the most valuable companies in the world, and it's because of this position that they have this outsized influence on the perception of the economy. Think about it. These companies are leading economic indicators themselves because of the very nature of their business model. These companies, they rely on consumer clicks and spending. If Apple isn't selling iPhones and if Google isn't selling ads to make you want to buy new shoes or new clothes, that's going to create some economic jitters. And these are the type of indicators that economists pay very close attention to when trying to predict what happens next, when trying to predict, is there going to be a recession? If so, how far out? Tech has been signaling to investors for the last few months that signaling that the boom times are over. In fact, Amazon was one of the first companies to call out the fact that they've just hired way too many warehouse workers. And they've essentially overbuilt for consumer growth because of the expectation that consumers will continue to spend the way that they have been. But this habit of consumer spending has shifted, especially as we've come out of the pandemic. Our habits have shifted. Now, this wouldn't be a complete analysis if I didn't call out the fact that all this what we're talking about an upcoming recession, it can also be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Meaning other companies start immediately reacting to big tech's downturn, and they start tightening their own belts and they start cutting back on their own spending because they see others doing it. But the moves aren't really cut or dry, meaning that big tech is embracing for an economic downturn. They're not just panicking because they see few key metrics, a few key KPIs go down. All this means is that there's something murky in the waters, that there's something coming up that we should all be preparing for. It's also noteworthy to point out that big tech grew exceptionally well during the pandemic, a lot more than other industries, so they just have overall more room to fail. We find ourselves in a position of a double whammy. And yes, I do like to use very sophisticated financial terms like whammy to describe our economic environment. This double whammy, one is already here and already wreaking havoc on household budgets, and the other is lurking somewhere around the corner. So how should you position yourself for a continued inflationary environment and a potential for a recession? To be crystal clear, we are no doubt in the current state of an inflationary environment, which I'm sure you are very well aware of every time you pay for your bills and groceries. Inflation tends to hit individuals and household budgets immediately. This should also not be a surprise. If you're preparing for retirement or are preparing for a major purchase in life, then your immediate concern should still be inflation. Now, it's important to prepare for a recession too, but part of good financial planning is to minimize the worry behind every single bad outcome. I know I've said this in countless other videos, but it's just such a strong fact, and I'm a big believer of having an emergency fund being your strongest ally, especially in times of economic uncertainties. This will also allow you to focus on setting a responsible budget and investing in a market that's already beaten up by inflation. There is no doubt that investing in an environment like this is difficult since we're already in the middle and the thick of this inflation storm. For example, one approach can be taking a look at financial companies or energy companies since they tend to benefit the most out of high inflation as prices go higher. This is also a very good time to make sure that cash that you have sitting and parked on the sidelines is working for you, is creating income for you, because there's nothing worse than losing purchasing power in an environment where there's high inflation. For those of you living in Canada as an example, the government of Canada has increased the Canada Child Benefit to $7,000 per child to help fight inflation. Look to your local governments, your state governments, your provincial governments, your federal national governments, see what benefits that they are proposing and how they can help you get through this inflationary environment. The key is being aware and knowing what benefits are available to you so you can take advantage of them. The Canada Child Benefit is a tax-free monthly payment straight to families, and these payments are calculated every July. And if you haven't already, make sure you go online and apply for this Canada Child Benefit. And if you want more information on how this benefit works, what are the steps involved, getting your share of this government benefit, make sure you check out this video where I walk you through all the steps you need to know. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you had some meaningful takeaways from this video. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and thanks button so I know to produce more content exactly like this. And make sure to check out all the links in the description below for some amazing discounts and sign-up bonuses on services I use on the daily. So I really want you to check them out and try them for yourselves. That's it for now. I'll talk to you in the comments section.